Hey everybody, welcome back to McLean Church Online. I'm your online site pastor, Chris Norris. I am excited to be spending time with you today, and whether you're a first-time viewer or one of our regulars, it's going to be an awesome service. We've got people meeting in person across our region. We've got folks listening on the radio, tuning in on the Erie Cable Network, even watching the service on YouTube. No matter where you're watching from, we're glad you're here, and a special welcome to you. Let's continue worshiping together today. Well, it finally feels like spring here in northwestern Pennsylvania, and we are anxiously awaiting many of our high school and college seniors' graduation. And as usual here at McLean Church, we want to cover them in prayer and wish them well. So beginning in May, we will begin acknowledging and recognizing several of our seniors here at McLean Church on social media. And then the first week of June, we will be honoring them during our services. If you are a senior or you know a senior that you would like to have recognized, make sure you head to mcleanchurch.org/seniors. Well, McLean Church Anywhere is a hit, and we are so excited to be sharing all the tools and all the resources you need to truly worship anywhere. And this includes worship songs, announcements, sermon files. No matter where you're worshiping or doing church these days, we want to make sure we equip you to do that. And if this is new to you, we want to provide you with training. So make sure you register for our virtual McLean Anywhere training event on Monday, April 19th at 7 p.m. You can learn more about that by using the McLean Church app or by going to our website and clicking on the McLean Church Anywhere page.
Welcome to another week where we get to stand in the victory of what our Savior has given us. Let's take a moment to worship Him for the amazing grace He's poured out on us. Shakes the whole earth with holy what you've done for me.
Hey worship team, thank you so much for leading us to this point in today's service, a very important moment where we have the opportunity to give back to God through our tithes and offerings. And here at McLean Church, our mission has always been to eliminate barriers to give people access to Christ. And through your generosity, we are able to do that. So if you feel so inclined to support our ministry, please visit mcleanchurch.org/give. We have several ways that you can give at that website. So in the coming moments, please do so.
If you're an iPhone user, you know there's been an evolution of options for navigating to your phone's home screen. And while I'm not an expert in the history of iPhone development, this is what I recall. In the early days, the first iPhones used an actual mechanical button at the bottom of the screen that when pressed would display the phone's home screen. The button looked like a button, it felt like a button, and when you pushed it, something happened. Now, roughly midway in the progression of iPhone models, the button at the bottom of the phone's home screen changed. And while it still looked like a button, it was essentially a virtual button. The button felt like a button when you pressed it, but the feeling was a bit of an illusion. The button didn't actually move like the old mechanical button did. It just felt like it was moving. And it did the same thing the previous button had done. It took you back home. When the iPhone 12 made its debut, it created quite a bit of consternation and confusion for users because the familiar home button, whether the mechanical one or the virtual one, it was missing. How were you supposed to get back home? I remember getting my iPhone 12 and looking perplexingly at it thinking, how does this thing work? And fortunately, our youngest daughter was still at home and she kindly and patiently explained to me that there was no longer a home button on the iPhone 12. You got to your home screen simply by swiping upward. Very interesting. It took a little bit of getting used to, but I can now get to my home screen on my iPhone 12 as easily and quickly as I did using the button on my first iPhone. We need to get to the home screen because it's from there that the rest of our virtual world makes sense. Whenever we're lost and confused in a conflicting array of apps, we can always reorient by going back home. And what's true on our phones is also true of life. You reorient by going back home. But what is the home screen of life? And what button do you push to get there? That's one of the key questions the Old Testament book of Leviticus answers, using images and symbols that are a long way from the world of iPhones and apps, but which when understood in their ancient context, help us define and access the home screen of life. We began our study of this book several months ago by explaining that this document comes to us from the ancient world, and it describes and talks about things that are largely unknown and unfamiliar to us as present-day people. And because of that, trying to read through the book of Leviticus, it can feel like an impossible task. And a lecture series on such a book seems like time wasted on irrelevant material. But when we understand the book against its historical and cultural context in the ancient world, the book of Leviticus, it comes alive with ideas and wisdom that are as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago. So let's remember for a minute the context in which everything described in the book of Leviticus is taking place. Remember, the Israelites, they've just emerged from slavery in Egypt. The only life, the only world, the only system they've ever known is one of slavery and oppression. Their only understanding of the world is a world in which the rich rule over the poor and the powerful rule over the weak. And the gods of the world are always on the side of the rich and the powerful. Now, freed from slavery, with a promise of a land that will be their own, the Israelites, they're free to create a society, to create a world, to create a system that will work any way they want it to. The only system they know, however, is the system of slavery and oppression. And it's a natural human tendency to repeat or duplicate the systems we know. Now, think about it like this. How did you initially parent your children? Well, it was likely in the way your parents parented you. Or how did your marriage initially function? Well, it was probably in the way you saw your parents' marriage function. Why did you cut the end off the ham? You've heard this story before, I'm sure, about the young woman who was preparing to cook her first ham. And before placing the ham in the oven, she cut a large slice off the end of the ham. And when asked by her husband why she'd done this, she replied, I don't know, but that's always what my mom did when she cooked a ham. So later the woman asked her mother why she cut the end off the ham, and her mother replied, well, I don't really know, but that's the way my mother always cooked a ham. Now, the mother's mother was still alive, and one day, while visiting her in the nursing home, the young woman asked the grandmother why she cut the end of the ham off before cooking it. And the grandmother replied, well, that's easy. I had a rather small oven that wouldn't quite hold a full ham, so cutting a slice off the end of it made it fit. We tend to repeat what we've experienced, which means the tendency of the Israelites would likely be to set up the same type of society or create the same type of world from which they came, a world where the rich ruled over the poor and the powerful ruled over the powerless. The only difference would be that now it would be the Israelites who would be the rich and the powerful oppressors. We repeat what we've experienced. But God, this new God who's appeared on the scene named Yahweh, this God has a different plan. This God's plan is to create a world where no one is oppressed, where the rich share with the poor, where the powerful use their power to create a world that works for all people. This is what this new God's plan is. And this new God, Yahweh, He's going to use the new nation of Israel to model that plan for the rest of the world. And the book of Leviticus is going to show the Israelites just how to do that. So, you know, if you're wondering if this ancient book is still relevant, just ask the question. Are we living in the kind of world that God was trying to create? A world that's not ruled by power or wealth, but by the ethic of love? Do we still have a ways to go toward creating that kind of world? If so, the book of Leviticus has something to say to us. And it all starts by reminding the Israelites of the need for a reference point, or the need to get back to their home screen. Listen as I read from Leviticus chapter 1, the first 2 verses. The Lord, and again this is just a translation or transliteration of the name Yahweh, called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. He said, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when anyone among you brings an offering to the Lord, bring as your offering an animal from either the herd or the flock." The book of Leviticus opens with God present in the tent of meeting or the tabernacle. The tent of meeting, it's an interesting term, isn't it? This is the tent where people would meet with God. The tent was to be placed in the middle of the Israelite tents. Remember, at this point in history, the young nation of Israel, it's a nomadic nation, moving around and living in tents. And by placing the tent of meeting in the middle of the camp, the Israelites would be constantly reminded that God, this new God named Yahweh, was in their midst. And Yahweh would be Israel's reference point for life. Yahweh, the God Jesus would later call Father, would give direction and definition to life. The Israelites would find their source of purpose and meaning in connection to Yahweh. Well, we all need a reference point for life, don't we? It's hard to know where you're going without a reference point, isn't it? And it's even more difficult to know if you're moving in the right direction if you don't have a reference point from which to take a bearing. Put a blindfold on someone and spin them around, then ask them to walk in the direction they had originally been facing. It's hard, if not impossible, to do, isn't it? We need reference points for life if we're to know which way we're going. And we need reference points to know how to answer the big questions of life. Should I take this job? Marry this person? Buy this house? Should I spend my money on this thing or that thing? Invest it here or there? Give it to this cause or that? Should I raise my children in this way or that way? Do I make a big deal out of this thing or not? Do I run my family the way my parents did? Or do I do it the way my friends are doing it down the street? Do I talk to this person or avoid them? Join this group or condemn this group? Hold this person in contempt or be accepting of them? It's hard to navigate life and life's questions without reference points. So most of us try to find a reference point or reference points that will be meaningful guideposts to us along life's way so that we can answer these kind of questions. For the ancient Israelites, this new God named Yahweh, again, the God that Jesus would later call Father, He would be the ultimate reference point for life. It was this God that would serve as the guidepost or the waypoint along the path of life to keep the Israelites properly oriented in the direction they should go, in the direction in which life and the world would work best. And this God would be located in the center of the camp. But of course, the question remained, how do we approach or access this God? This God, Yahweh, He's among us, He's in the middle of us, but how do we gain access to Him? Because in the ancient world, you didn't just walk up to the gods, at least not without an appointment. So beginning in verse 2 of chapter 1 and running all the way through chapter 7 of Leviticus, a means for approaching God is described. And the means through which the Israelites are to approach God is through a system of offerings or sacrifices. Now, in the ancient world, sacrifices or offerings to the gods were commonplace in religious practice. In their most familiar version, ancient world sacrifices involved the slaughtering of an animal and the burning of the meat of that animal on an altar, or think of a big ancient version of a charcoal grill that would consume or burn up everything that was placed on it, offering it up to the gods. Where and why this system originated, we're not exactly sure. There's a lot of interesting speculation behind the origins of this practice in the ancient world. But what we do know is that the practice of offering sacrifices to the gods was commonplace in the ancient world, and through this practice, it was understood that people could gain access to or approval from the gods. The book of Leviticus describes a system of sacrifices by which people are to approach Yahweh. That's what the first 7 chapters of the book of Leviticus are all about. And a couple of things stand out about this system of sacrifices that the book of Leviticus describes. First, the system is understandable. Read through these first 7 chapters. While the practices may seem strange, it's not hard to understand what the practices are or how they're to be implemented. A person didn't have to guess, should I offer this or that? It was all made quite clear. The ancient Israelites didn't have to wonder how they could access this God who was the reference point for life located in the middle of their camp. The sacrificial system made it quite clear and understandable. To go back to the illustration used at the beginning of this talk, there was no uncertainty about how to navigate to the home screen. Instructions for what button to push or which way to swipe, they were simple and clear. The second thing to understand about the sacrificial system outlined in chapters 1 through 7 of Leviticus is that it was accessible. Everyone could participate in it and benefit from it. Provision is made to offer what you had or what you could easily obtain. Now, we'll say more about this next week, but consider for just a minute the first 3 sacrifices that are described in Leviticus chapter 1. We begin with a description of a sacrifice from the herd. Then the author talks about a sacrifice from the flock. And then thirdly, he talks about a sacrifice of birds. You see what's going on here? If you're wealthy enough to have a herd of cattle, then it's a bull from the herd that you should bring to sacrifice. If you only own a flock of sheep, then a lamb from the flock is all you need to bring. And if you've got neither a herd of cattle or a flock of sheep, then guess what? Bring a bird. Bring what you have. Bring what you are able. Isn't this amazing? This God in the middle of the camp does not want to exclude anyone. So here in clear detail are the ways the ancient Israelites can approach Him, and here's what they can bring, and there's an option for everyone. Now we could and probably should think about that for quite a long time, shouldn't we? This new God is not exclusive, He's inclusive. There's a path for everyone to get to Him. And this God is not elusive. You don't have to wonder how to approach Him or if you're approaching Him in the right way or not. This God makes clear how you're to come to Him in an easy-to-follow process or in easy-to-follow steps. In an ancient world context, this is revolutionary. Something new is going on here. This God is not like the other gods. Now, as we've said repeatedly, the world in which all this is taking place, it's a long, long way from the world in which we live today. In the ancient world, sacrifices were commonly accepted practices for how the gods were to be approached or accessed. The God of the Israelites takes over an ancient world practice of offering sacrifices, and He revises it and transforms it so that it functions as a means for people to access His presence. It's interesting that God is always using the forms that are understandable in a given moment of time in history to make His presence accessible to people. So in a culture familiar with sacrifices, God used sacrifices as an image or means to help people access and understand Him. This, in many ways, sets the pattern for what we talked about last week, which has always been true of the church. The church has always used forms and methods that make sense to a particular culture to enable the people of that culture to access and understand God. This is why our second core value as a church is cultural relevance. And this pattern of cultural relevance or adaptation is functioning way back in the book of Leviticus. There is a lot of wisdom in this ancient book. Now, Jesus would make clear in the first century that we no longer needed sacrifices to approach God, but rather now, because of the role Jesus would play on our behalf, we could approach God directly with no system necessary. And furthermore, we need no longer to see or understand God as only being present in the tent of meeting or the temple, but now God would instead be present within all of His people through the Holy Spirit. We each would become a tent of meeting or a temple in which God would reside, always present with and always accessible to us. The home screen would always be available. All we need to do is look to see it. In this ancient book of Leviticus, the Israelites were reminded that life needs a reference point. God or Yahweh was to be that reference point, a reference point that would lead people to create a new kind of world where the ethic of love would govern all of life. Through an understandable and accessible system of sacrifices, the Israelites could approach God, inquire of God, be directed by God, and be reoriented by God. The sacrificial system would be the button that took them back to the home screen. Now, here's the thing. This God is still present among us. Jesus taught us that He is within us, and He can be accessed by prayer. It's no longer a sacrifice that is needed to get me back home. It's a conversation. And maybe that conversation is one you're very much in need of having right now. So let me suggest a simple step to put the ancient wisdom of the book of Leviticus into present-day practice. Set aside some time today or this week. It doesn't need to be a lot of time. 15 minutes or a half an hour will do. And go for a walk or get someplace quiet where you won't be disturbed and have a simple conversation with God. Tell Him the 3 things that you're most thankful for in your life right now. Reflect for a few moments on what you're grateful for and let God know like you'd let a friend know. Then tell God the 3 things that you're most concerned about in your life right now. Tell Him, really tell Him why these things concern you and trouble you. Don't propose a solution to Him, just tell Him how you feel. Then be quiet and keep walking or sitting or whatever you're doing while you're having this talk. This simple step will begin to open you to the presence of God just like the system of sacrifices did for the ancient Israelites. It will begin to make you aware of the greater reality that is behind your present reality. And it will begin to orient your life around life's ultimate reference point. And this simple step, taking a few minutes to have a conversation with God, it's just as understandable and just as accessible as the ancient system of sacrifices outlined by the book of Leviticus was. You know, perhaps if you do this once, you'll do it again. Maybe like the sacrificial system did for the Israelites, it will become a pattern for your life. It's a good pattern to have. Because remember, when life is disorienting, you need to navigate back to your home screen where God is your most accessible app.
'cause the God I serve knows only how to triumph. My God will never fail. My God will never fail. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to you, Lord. I'm gonna see a victory.
What a great message from Pastor Brian today, and I just love how he talked about community and the opportunity that we have to gather together in community and worship God. And what's so cool about community these days is it's not limited to four walls, right? Here we are watching church together, no matter where you are or how you're experiencing church today. Maybe you're on a mobile device, maybe you're at home. We are in community together. And the great thing is too, is we are in community throughout the week. McLean offers so many opportunities to stay connected through our social media, through our YouTube channel, through life groups that are meeting, through many other opportunities that you can learn about at mcleanchurch.org. Well, thank you so much for being here today and being in community with our online service. We hope to see you back here next week.